Welcome to the Greater Irvine Chamber Business Insights podcast series, where we address challenges and ideas for early stage and entrepreneurial business leaders. Your host today is Dave Cofaro, Interim President and CEO of the Greater Irvine Chamber.
Well, hello, folks. Welcome to the Greater Irvine Chamber podcast. I'm Dave Cofaro. I'm pleased to have you here with us today. And, one of the most important and urgent themes in business today is talent management. So all those important topics like recruiting, onboarding, developing people, career pathing, retaining, engaging people, and then something we hear more about today, which is helping people decelerate in their careers. So with as critical as talent management is to business success, the data suggests that there are a lot of opportunities for improvement by management. So, for example, I'm sure a lot of folks saw this, but the latest Gallup Employee Engagement Survey headline in January said, in the new workplace, U.S. employee engagement stagnates. So the article continued on and it said that Gallup found that last year in 2023, employees in the United States felt more detached from their employers, with less clear expectations, lower levels of satisfaction with your organization, and less connection to its mission and purpose than they did 4 years ago. They're also less likely to feel that someone at work cares about them as a person. Remarkable and unfortunate. The Gallup study found that only 33%, one-third of all employees, were engaged in their work, and that disengaged or actively disengaged employees cost businesses in this country an estimated $1.9 trillion in lost productivity annually. That is a remarkable number. So the challenge for business right now is we've got a lot of folks who are disengaged, and that's true right here in our community. But I think it's also an opportunity for managers, for leaders, for business owners, for CEOs to find new ways to help elevate their game. So with that as the backdrop, today I'm joined by David Donnelly, who is a talent optimization specialist, a partner with Gecko Hospitality, a talent acquisition and consulting firm, and he's based right here. And David is also a fantastic ambassador for the Greater Irvine Chamber of Commerce. So David, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Well, hey, thanks, Dave. I really appreciate it. Yeah, those are some staggering numbers via the Gallup poll. It's shocking, isn't it?
It's shocking. It's uncomfortable. And, the thing that I think to myself sometimes is, like, if I go somewhere and I have a negative experience with an employee, the thing I think to myself is they're probably one of those 2/3 that are disengaged or actively disengaged in their work. And that's probably not a good way to rationalize it, but it's real.
Right. And it could be one of the, I think it said in that Gallup poll that there's a 70% engagement for companies that have a great culture. And so it's probably a company that's not in that bucket right there as well.
Right. I love that saying, and I know it's been attributed to different people. I thought it was Peter Drucker who said it first, but that culture eats strategy for lunch, and that when you have the strong culture, that everything else follows. So with that, let's just start out with just a brief description of your work and exactly what it means to be a talent optimization specialist, David.
All right. Well, thanks. I would say that my role is kind of a dual role. The talent optimization part is more attributed to what I do with predictive index. And then the other side of it is the executive recruitment that I do with Gecko Hospitality. We try to mix both in together, but again, these are two separate entities. When I'm working with clients as an executive recruiter, trying to fill their talent acquisition needs, a big part of it is to understand what is their culture and what are they doing, or what is their strategy on how to optimize the talent that we're getting for them. How do they fit into their strategy is basically what we try to find out. Again, going back to what we were just talking about with the Gallup poll, it really depends on how engaged the client is in building that culture and understanding what their strategy is in order to reach their goals.
So let's drill deeper into what you just said. You're looking to match a candidate with a culture, and that's something you can't really get from an online approach to applying for a job or seeking talent. How do you get into that? How do you sort of understand what the culture of an organization is and then understand the candidate to see how they fit? Because that seems like a really important dimension of getting a job.
Yeah, no, definitely. And there's all sorts of different ways to do it. A lot of times I think in the recruiting world, we're relying on kind of gut instinct combined with the research and development we've done with the client about their culture. Again, which is where you can tie in kind of technology, where they have data driven, research and points on how would a candidate fit into a current culture. Unfortunately, you would already have to have a foundation with that data. So again, it kind of goes back on what is the information that you're getting from the client. If whether I'm dealing with, let's say, the CEO or the GM or the human resources department, how much of that culture are they, for lack of better terms, selling to me so I can turn around and try and sell that to a candidate to see if there is a fit. So there's a little bit of art and science. You can lean a lot more towards science if you have the resources to do that.
Right, right. Okay, well, so one of the things that often comes up is people talk about compensation. So we're clear compensation is an important element of deciding to accept a position, or if you're the hiring manager, the hiring firm, you're always looking for how do we find that right place to pay people. So that's one dimension of why somebody would leave a position. What are some of the other reasons that you see when you're working with someone who wants to leave their current employer and go to a company that you're representing?
Yeah, good question. One of them that's not really thought about, or if you do research, you don't really comes up, but there are people that have personal circumstances, whether they're caring for aging parents or they have a child that needs health care, so family health issues. A spouse may have been transferred, so they're relocating somewhere, and so the spouse is looking for a role. So personal circumstances certainly play a part. They may not People may not be seeing a career advancement opportunities where they're currently working, even though they may have tried, working with their direct report to see if there is career advancement. You know, the hospitality industry is guilty of this, but a work-life balance for sure. People are looking for better work-life balance, and that could include, adding in some remote work along with some office work. Challenging, maybe the job's not challenging enough. That perhaps are not being valued and appreciated. But again, we kind of dial back into that company culture. Maybe the culture is not either moving at the same pace that they're looking for, or to become stagnant. And then there's a saying out there that, people really don't leave companies, they leave the managers. So maybe they're not having, either a manager has changed and they're not having a positive relationship with the current manager that they have, and they don't feel that there's a way around that. So those are several reasons why people would be looking.
So I want to get into the people leaving their managers. That's a really important topic, but I want to go back to the work-life balance concept, and I underscore concept because it's kind of an ethereal thing. Is there such a thing as work-life balance?
Oh, if that's not a rhetorical question,
No, 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 seriously.
I think it is a personal preference, a basis that my work-life balance might be different than, let's say, my wife's, right? Um, when I was working in operations, I was working close to 70 hours. Now, if I could get it down to 60 hours a week, that was a pretty good work-life balance where, if she's working more than 40, that's not a good work-life balance. So it is, I think it goes back to personal preference. In what I'm seeing now, especially in the hospitality industry, is there's a lot more balance on the work side of life and not the life side of life, right?
Yeah.
So I think people are pressured, especially because it's so understaffed right now. But again, I think, at least my perception, especially in the United States, is there's a lot of emphasis on work and not enough emphasis on the time you have outside of work. So to kind of
Yeah.
roundabout answer your question, there's not really a really solid work-life balance, I don't think here.
Well, is an employer, I think about the question sometimes like, okay, what's my responsibility to my employees in work-life balance? And I think part of it is setting expectations. I will admit, sometimes I have a bad habit of working on the weekends and I'll send emails to people at times that I shouldn't. And what I realize, and this is an apology to anybody that I've worked with and done this to, but if I send somebody an email at 5 in the morning on Sunday morning or something, they don't need to respond. There's a wonderful new element of Microsoft Outlook, which is it gives you a little headline. You've probably seen this. It says, "This is outside of normal business hours.
Yes.
Do you want to delay it?" That is a wonderful thing. So, but I think that for employers, for some of the companies that are members of our organization, we have to recognize how we set expectations and the way we communicate with our employees, because we can set up unrealistic expectations. And if somebody feels they have to respond to an email at 5 in the morning on Sunday morning, I'm not really doing my job, my part of the equation to, help people establish the work-life balance. Ultimately, it's on the employee, but we play a role in that too.
No, I 100% agree. I have a client that does not allow communications after work hours, for most of their employees. Now, if you're the general manager of the hotel, obviously you are a 24/7, type of on-call, employee. But there are tools and methods that some of my clients are using to try and, incorporate that kind of work-life balance so they don't feel pressured to answer emails after work.
Yeah. So you mentioned people leave their managers, and I see the research on that often. It's that relationship, it's the connection, but let's turn that to kind of the positive side. So what are some tips for managers, for leaders on effectively engaging and retaining employees so that they aren't the person that people leave? They're the people that employees want to work with. What are some
Right.
tips on
Yeah,
your list?
great question. I personally have left managers before, and even though I enjoyed the company tremendously, and there was just no way around it. But I find that if managers kind of set an expectation from the beginning, by letting their staff know, um, that this is the job description, this is the expectations, this is the vision and the mission statement, that we're working with, and walk the walk, is a great tool, and philosophy to have. I say that managers can come and go in different parts of your career or of your tenure at one employer. But for me, a well-designed orientation and onboarding program is key, when you're hiring somebody new. And that's just starting with the basics, making sure that everybody understands the layout of the building, the office, parking, IDs, essentials, making sure that there's a training agenda and a schedule, have that emailed prior to their start day so they can kind of wrap their mind around what's going to be happening in their first couple of days, and have their stuff ready. And I've started a couple of jobs where my email address wasn't even active, and so didn't have a computer on my desk. So having all those things ready really, it starts off on the right foot. And then I would have to say, after setting those clear expectations, there's regular check-ins. I say when you have a new employee, that should be almost daily or weekly until you get through that first month. And then have team building activities. Make sure that there's communication within the team. Get the new people involved. Get them acclimated. And one of the most important things I think is a mentorship program, where you have somebody that has tenure in the company, that will be working either directly or indirectly with the new employee. Have somebody be a mentor to that employee, because if you're the department head or the CEO or whatever your title is, and you have a lot of direct reports, it's difficult for you to be in the minutia of holding the hand of a new employee. So a mentor is particularly helpful. And make sure that it's that the new employee is announced. Everybody knows that this new employee is coming. Make them feel welcome, even if you have a luncheon or an event, welcoming them. But I think that would be a great way to retain an employee, because a lot of times if you misstep in that hiring process or that onboarding process, there's a good chance that you're not going to keep that employee.
I love that theme of welcoming, just encapsulating some of the things that you said, David. And when somebody first joins, it's that first impression that can make such a big difference. And the mentoring, the connection to help people feel grounded, to ask the questions that may be the new person questions and you might feel a little uncomfortable or embarrassed about. But that impression, that engagement, I look at what you do with the chamber, how you welcome new members and help them feel engaged. And the same thing is true for employers. When we can cause somebody to feel you're here for a reason, part of the reason is our mission, our vision. We want you to be a part of it, and help people feel that they co-own that. That's valuable. That's powerful. And it does set it up for success. I also like the regular conversations. I think it's so important for managers to have regular one-to-ones with their employees. And even if it's just to say, this is your time, it's 30 minutes or 45 minutes or lunch occasionally or coffee or whatever. This is your time. I don't have any agenda other than to hear what's going on for you. How are you doing? And one other thing too that I'll mention that I think is really important for managers is it's really important for us to make a distinction when we're in a conversation with an employee, whether it's a leadership conversation, a management conversation, or a coaching conversation. The distinction I make between those is leadership is a conversation where we're talking about here's the vision, here's where we're going as an organization, here's what matters, those big picture things. The management conversation is around here are the specific responsibilities, goals, objectives, and so forth. The coaching conversation is not the first two. It's how can I help you be as successful as you can be in your role? And I think all of those contribute to causing engagement with employees. So the welcoming theme, though, it doesn't end after day one.
No, it doesn't. It's constant check-ins, and I liked how you kind of put those into three different buckets. And there's also the one that's just a casual kind of check-in. How are things going? How's the family? Those kind of things. I think that also pays dividends, because they, sometimes people, when they go into these work relationships, it's almost like you feel like you're treated like a number, and you kind of, the employee kind of sees their boss as a number, and the boss kind of sees the employee as a number. And when you can break that barrier down and make everybody human, it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah. So I know not all of the organizations that are part of the chamber have worked with a recruiting firm in the past. What kind of feedback do you hear from folks that work with you, concerns that they may have in partnering with you or with other recruiting firms?
Oh, good question. Yeah, it's quality and quantity, or quality versus quantity, is a big concern. Sometimes there's a reputation that that recruiters are kind of like resume brokers, and all they're doing is they're just throwing the spaghetti against the wall kind of process to see what sticks, and it's speed rather than a quality kind of approach, as we talked about in the beginning. How do you match a company, their culture, with a potential employee? So that's a big one. Cost is another one. There's a lot of recruiting firms out there. There's different ways of doing it. There's retained, there's engaged, there's contingent. If you're in an engaged retained search, there's a fee up front, which is applied to your final fee. But a lot of people, it's expensive. I'm not going to lie, recruiting is expensive. We try to work with people within their budgets on different kinds of tiered programs, whether it's an engaged retained search, which would be a little bit higher, as opposed to maybe a subscription fee or something like that, where we're constantly focused on helping you get candidates in there. Other concerns might be, does this recruiting firm understand our culture, the hiring company's culture? Does your recruiting company, do you come from a place that has a positive culture? Because you're kind of representing this company. So Gecko has been around for 20 years or 24 years, and we have a pretty big online presence. We've been part of Forbes list now for the last 5 years, I think 5 out of 6 years. So that's a concern, whether it's a cultural fit. And then the selection process, how do we, as a recruiting firm, how do we vet our candidates? Are we providing fully vetted candidates, and see what type of methods and analytics do we use for that? So those are some of the concerns that I get.
Yeah.
Cost is one of the big ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and as you say that, I understand that, right? I mean, I think twice or 3 times or 4 times about it before I make that investment. On the other hand, I think about that $1.9 trillion in lost productivity or disengaged employees, and I think part of that is just the upfront fit. I understand it's the ongoing, but if you don't make the right choice right up front and hiring the right person, it's just not going to work out. Which kind of leads to the next question, which is, what are some of the things that hiring managers should focus on when they're interviewing a candidate to make sure it's a good fit for their organization?
Yes, great question. This is one of the things I noted, that having a good assessment tool in process in your organization is a great help, whether it's PI or one of the other ones out there. But I think what the hiring managers need to know is, do you understand what the candidate's skills are? Reading a resume, I tell people resumes are like business cards. It's basically just your name and in your information and what kind of business you're in. It doesn't necessarily equate to truth, and it may not equate to what you're looking for, but assess the candidate's qualifications, and do they align? And if they don't align, I always tell my clients and candidates, is there something else in the company that they might align with? So if just because that candidate isn't a fit for that position, is the candidate worth investigating for another role? I mean, you could be saving yourself some time in that area. Evaluate whether they're a cultural fit. It's a hard one, at first. Again, when you have tools, assessment tools, it's helpful. And then assess their potential. Do you see the future of this candidate in a growth opportunity in your company? Behavioral interviewing is, again, using some of the tools that are out there, which there's a lot of information, statistics out there that a lot of companies now are leaning towards a lot more analytical tools in their hiring. And then the behavioral interviewing part is when you, instead of answering yes or no questions, get them involved in some scenario questions. And then do they have proper communication skills when you're evaluating? And if they're giving you one-word answers, and they're not opening up a little bit, that's kind of a red flag. There are some introverted people out there that do, that are great employees, but you do want to make sure that they can communicate effectively, especially if you're doing leadership roles.
Yeah, all really great tips. So now I'm going to ask you the hardest question. As we come to a close, what one piece of advice, not 10, just one piece of advice would you like to share with the audience regarding engaging employees? You've covered a lot of ground, but now it just comes down to the one thing you want people to take away.
Just one, Dave?
Just one.
Oh, my goodness.
If people want more, they can take you out for a cup of coffee. But right now, you're just giving them one.
I would say hold everyone accountable with consistent and fair practices. And if you want me to dive in a little bit deeper, I just find that if that helps your culture, because if you're not consistent and fair and holding everyone accountable, you will divide your staff. You will, because there's always A players and B players and C players. And if the A players are constantly having to pick up the slack, they're going to leave. If you're not holding the C players accountable. So
terrific way to bring this to a close. David Donnelly, thank you so much. Fantastic conversation. Really appreciate you being on today's podcast. Thanks, folks, for joining in. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for the Greater Irvine Chamber Business Insights podcast. To stay informed about upcoming podcasts and other important business news, please subscribe to our channel or check the Greater Irvine Chamber website.